In the 2010 midterm elections and all the excitement over Republicans taking over Congress that year, the Speaker of the House changing from being Nancy Pelosi to being John Boehner instead, in the face of that big deal changeover after the 2010 elections, it was sort of overlooked for a while that election brought about an even bigger change outside of Washington. In the states, Republicans swept to power in state legislatures that year in a way they really had not done in ages. Republicans took control of more seats at the state level in that election than at any time since 1928. Their sweep in 2010 ushered in 2 years of Republican governance in the states that, as much as anything else, defined the Republican Party and what being a Republican stood for. So it was 2 years of rolling back abortion rights and stripping union rights and passing really hardline immigration laws and making it harder for people to vote, making it harder for people to register to vote. It was 2 aggressive coast-to-coast years of Republican governance in the states, defining what it meant to be a Republican, in a way that the Republican Party's national candidates sometimes tried to run away from. But ultimately, it ended up being inescapable. The proof is in the pudding, right? We know what you will be like in power. We know what your party will be like in power because of how you have comported yourself with the power that you have already got. What happens in the states matters across the country, even in national elections. That was the legacy of 2010. This year, in 2012, overshadowed by the presidential election and the congressional results once again, this year, again, something amazing happened in the states. In 2012, this past election, an avalanche of states that had previously been under divided government, with Democrats controlling one part of the government, Republicans controlling the other, those states have now moved to one party controlling everything. So in North Carolina, for example, the Republicans winning back the governor's mansion there this year means that Republicans there will control the House and the Senate and the governor's seat. In Minnesota, other direction. Democrats won back control of the House in Minnesota and the Senate there. And because they already held the governor's mansion, that means one party Democratic control throughout that state next year. And so it went across the country. In 2012, the parties consolidated power at the state level in a way that is sort of without precedent in modern American history. Red states got really, really red. Blue states got really, really blue. And it goes even further than that because it's not just one party rule, one party majority. It's one party mega rule in a lot of states. Like, take a look at California. Democrats don't just have a majority in the California state legislature now. They're going to have a supermajority, meaning that Republicans essentially don't have enough minority power to stop anything the Democrats want to do. It's the same story in Indiana, but for the Republicans. Indiana Republicans will now have a supermajority in the House and in the Senate, and they hold the governor's mansion. Ditto Oklahoma. Republicans took a supermajority and they turned it into an even bigger supermajority. This is what happened in 2012. Not just the disappearance of divided rule in the state, split rule between two parties, but the rise of supermajority one-party rule. That is a position of immense power for whichever party it is that's in control. They get to do what they want. I mean, if you think about it, you better trust those people because there's essentially no bulwark against them in these states. One state that is on the precipice of getting that sort of supermajority status is the great state of Ohio. Heading into this year's elections, Republicans in Ohio controlled the governor's mansion. They controlled the House. They controlled the Senate. And in the Senate, Republicans currently have that supermajority status. In the Ohio Senate, it is the Democrats there. There are Democrats there, but they are essentially powerless. And the Ohio House, Republicans are definitely in control there. They have the majority. But will they have a supermajority there, too? An unreviewable, uncheckable mega majority that lets them rule at will? They might. They are one seat away from that in the Ohio House, one seat away from giving Republicans total unobstructed control in Ohio, rendering the Democratic Party and state government there essentially moot. They only need one House seat in order to get that. And right now in Ohio, there are 2 House seats that have not been called, that are too close, and they've gone to a recount. If Republicans win both of those seats, Ohio Republicans will have, what's a nicer way to say, a death grip on power in that state. How are those races going to be decided in Ohio? Remember this guy? Yes, Republican Secretary of State Jon Husted of Ohio. Jon Husted, you may recall, worked tirelessly leading up to this year's election to try to limit the number of days with early voting in the state. Early voting, of course, tends to favor Democrats. He attempted at one point to make it so Republican-leaning parts of the state would have more of an opportunity to early vote than Democratic-leaning parts of the state. But the other thing Jon Husted did was that he fought right up until Election Day to make it easier for him to throw out provisional ballots. Provisional ballots, basically ballots that are put aside because there's some question about that voter's eligibility or where they are voting. And in the two House races that have yet to be decided, guess what it is all coming down to? Look at this one. In one of the races, it's 14 votes that separate the two candidates. 14 votes between them. And in that race, the number of provisional ballots that Secretary Jon Husted has ordered be thrown away is 114. That might make a difference. In the other House race that has gone to a recount, the candidates are separated just by this tiny margin of 119 votes. Guess how many provisional ballots Jon Husted wants thrown out in that race? More than double the margin, 270. In those two races, Ohio Democrats are now alleging that those provisional ballots, which could decide these two races and thereby decide whether or not the Ohio Republicans have a supermajority, rendering Democrats moot in the state. Ohio Democrats are alleging that those provisional ballots are being thrown out illegally by Secretary of State Jon Husted. Democrats say the ballots are being thrown out, quote, in violation of federal law. These two races are so close right now, their outcomes will determine the balance of power in the state of Ohio. They will determine if Republicans in that state have a veto-proof supermajority that renders Democrats irrelevant. And that question is hanging on those provisional ballots that Democrats say the Republican Secretary of State is having thrown out illegally. Ohio Democrats are now suggesting they're going to sue over what's going on there right now, and you can understand why they might. Any power they hope to have in the state depends on it. Watch this space.